Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between.
Carla Lalli Music is a chef, cookbook author, and YouTube personality. We got together to discuss her constantly evolving career in the food industry, from food service to teaching, food writing, YouTube influencing, and finally cookbook author. To learn more about Carla, you can visit her website at carlalallimusic.com.
Okay, great. All right, so we're just going to get into it. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, fantastic. So I didn't realize that your mother worked in food. So you're raised in this Italian-American family where there's like mega food, and your mother was in food. So what was that like?
Well, it was incredible as a person growing up in that household because she was a great cook, but she also worked in the food industry. So I kind of grew up having great food everywhere. The food at home was great. And then part of her job was eating out. So when we ate out, we were always getting stoked and going to great restaurants. So as far as I was concerned, wherever you went, the food was great.
That's amazing. And where did you grow up?
I was born in Los Angeles, and my parents moved kind of back and forth, LA, Brooklyn, LA, and then we landed in New York on the Upper West Side when I was 8. So I really consider myself a New Yorker.
For sure. But it's interesting. Yeah. It's like, so nothing's changed, I guess. New York, LA, right?
Exactly. If you're in media, both of my parents were writers and editors, journalists, and it was always for a job was the reason that would, bring them to another part of the country. But yeah.
So do you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger sister.
Is she a foodie too?
She loves to eat. She's a great cook, but she is a ceramicist.
Very, very
Which is
cool.
kind of food adjacent. Their ceramics
it still goes under
Blue
the arts.
Hill.
Oh.
Yeah, if you eat at Blue Hill Stone Barns, you'll eat off of their ceramics.
I have eaten there. That's very, very
there you
cool.
Go.
There you go. And so when you went to school, you went to Brown, I guess you always just kind of knew you would fall into the world of media and food.
I think that my assumption was I would end up doing something, writerly, books, magazines, which when I first got out of college was exactly what I did. But I didn't like it, and I was very bored, and it wasn't my passion.
So were you just writing? Is that what you were doing?
I was a assistant editor at Grove Atlantic, which was Grove Press. And then I got in the first internet wave. I had a job at a website in, the mid 90s.
When it all began.
Exactly. And it wasn't until that place went belly up and everybody got these 6-week severance packages. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And I had a conversation with my dad who said, if you ever wanted to go back to school, this would be a really great time to do it. And I enrolled in culinary school right then.
Which is amazing. First of all, the fact that you even got 6 weeks is shocking.
Shocking
that they went belly up and gave you 6 weeks. Like, that's a gift of all gifts.
Yep.
So which French Culinary Institute? The one that's in New York downtown?
Yeah, it's now called the International Culinary something.
All right.
And I did the 6-month professional program, and then I became a line cook. So the irony was, like, when I started cooking as a line cook, I knew this was it. I wanted this. I had found my thing. I love to cook. I love the adrenaline of it. I love this hard work. And I was like, thought that I had chosen this thing so different from my parents, nothing like what they do. And then 10 years later, I had a job at a food magazine.
That's what happened. So what's interesting about the French Culinary, it's a 6-month program, and you grew up in this food family. And I just think about my children who all know how to cook and bake and entertain and all those things. And the most important, of course, is timing.
100%
is what did you learn that was so different there?
I didn't really learn how to cook growing up in a house where my mom cooked because she was a great cook. So
Right.
I didn't like cook at her elbow and, all of those sort of images that you might have in your mind of being in an Italian American family. It wasn't until I went to college that I was like, I have to figure this out because this food is bad. The food here is terrible. So I knew very basic. I could make pasta. I could make very simple proteins. I could cook eggs, but I had been living on a budget and didn't really know how to do much. So in cooking school, I learned all of the real technique. I learned searing, caramelizing, pan roasting, baking, whisking, all of the terms, the basic recipes, the cuts. Um, and it was a really good way to get what I needed to go into a restaurant, which is really where I learned everything I learned.
Right. Oh, it's interesting. I mean, I think I taught myself how to do all these things by raising 3 children that like to eat.
Exactly. And so did my mother. She
Yeah.
didn't go to culinary school. She cooked her way through Julia Child, and then she cooked every day.
Exactly. So, where were you a line cook?
At Montrachet in Tribeca.
Nice.
Yep. And then I was at Union Pacific, which was Rocco DeSpirito's restaurant. And that's
A short blip in history.
right. And I was there, I worked with him for 4 years. So I started as a line cook and then became the kitchen manager. And that also dovetailed with when he was writing his cookbook. And he knew that I had this publishing background, and it kind of all of these different tendrils of my experience kind of came together there.
And then you ended up at Shake Shack.
And then I was the general manager at the first Shake Shack.
How was that going home with that smell every day?
There's a really funny story actually. So my son, who's now 17, was a baby. He was still nursing. And one of the first days that we actually were open for business and making burgers, I rushed home to get home before bedtime because I'd missed bedtime like 3 days in a row because of the restaurant opening. And I made it home in time and was so excited to nurse him and put him to bed and sat down in the glider. And I started nursing, and he just like pulled his head away and burst into tears looking at my husband. And I was like, what's going on? Like, I've only been gone 2 days and he's already. And he was like crying and pulling his head away. And I was like, what is happening? And Fernando was like, I don't know how to say this to you, but you smell like a hamburger. He's like, maybe just like change your shirt real quick so you smell like you, because basically like a cow came home and tried to nurse him.
That's so good. I mean, the smell between the hamburger and the French fries and the whole thing. I mean, it just it permeates on you forever.
People don't realize it's not only the smell, but it's when you cook like a fatty chicken thigh,
Oh, yes,
and
the grease.
that oil spatter just like ends up everywhere. That would be in my eyelashes, on my eyebrows, in my hair. So it was just like being in like a fat aerosol.
Right, must have been great for your skin.
Very dewy.
And so at one point you hung out in the depths of the cooking fryer. When did you transition into food writing?
After Shake Shack, I was actually teaching restaurant consulting at the Institute for Culinary Education. And I got recruited through a friend for a job at Everyday Food magazine, which was a Martha Stewart magazine. And I was very happy doing what I was doing. I was pregnant with my second child by then, and I thought, well, I'll go in these interviews because a lot of my students are really curious about food media, and I didn't have that much to tell them. So I was like, I'll go on this interview, and at least I'll have some good anecdotes about like interviewing at Martha Stewart and what that was like. And then I got hired as the deputy editor. So it was, I had a story to tell, which was that I'm leaving.
But you eventually ended up at Bon Appetit, and all of these magazines have had such an interesting history. And, you look at Condé Nast today, and I talked to someone, I think last week, who's there. And I said, I feel like you are sitting on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
None of them seem to have believed that technology and online content was going to take over their physical publications. Not that I don't love still physical publications, but I don't think anyone's figured out how you do both.
Right.
And so you were there for 10 years, and then it was a debacle.
Total debacle.
Total debacle. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
All right, great.
I mean, when I started at Bon Appetit, I had a lot of different job titles there. I was hired as a features editor, and my job was really to edit, recipe stories. So I was adjacent to the test kitchen, but I wasn't part of the test kitchen. And one of the things that was really great about my experience at Bon Appetit was that the more time I spent there, I was able to advance. And like that had always been a goal in any place where I worked. I wanted to work places where people stayed for a while, they got better at their jobs, you achieve some level of expertise or just experience in accruing that.
And upward mobility.
And upward mobility. And I was really able to do that at BA. And at the end, I was the food director. So I was in charge of the test kitchen. All of the test kitchen people reported to me. And we were making videos, and there was a lot of notoriety and success around that. And when it imploded, actually, I had already become a food editor at large. So I was no longer like staff. But I worked with these people for 8 years. I was really, really close with a lot of them. And Adam had been my boss for a very long time, so I knew him really well. What happened, I think, was right and difficult, and it obviously caused not only like a lot of professional anguish, but I lost friendships that were really important to me also. So it was a huge learning in like, yeah, your work family isn't actually your family. Like this is work. And just being kind of thrown into a very public, vitriolic place, so really overnight. So it also caused me, and I'm thankful for this, to completely rethink the way that I thought about social media, because when you're on the good side of social media, it's like, it's great, it's awesome, I love it, you're getting so much validation. And when it flips, it is so hurtful and damaging to like your psyche. And you have to learn to separate, like, that's not me. That's a representation of me that I use primarily for work. And to, draw some distinction between the two. And as painful as it was, I don't ever wish that it didn't happen, because I think that it had to happen, and it has created so many important conversations about food and colonialism and white supremacy and exclusion and privilege and racism. And I don't think that I would have thought about those things unless something really extreme like that happened.
Right. Well, it is very interesting in how these conversations are taking place across the globe, really, in workplaces, be it from the timing was right, we got to the top of a hill and everyone's like, wait a second here, or the frustration of people that were succeeding at the same level but not getting the same accolades. I mean, we could go on and on and on. But what is amazing to me, just like Me Too, just as in or canceling people, or that did things in the past and didn't even realize they did it, that there's been
Right.
such a force that has happened so quickly that it, 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 and I don't know if it could have happened any other way.
Right. Yeah. And I was made aware of how unaware I was. And that was embarrassing. And I was ashamed of past assumptions and past behavior. And it was really painful, but it was like really eye-opening. And I'm glad it happened to me now instead of in 20 years when I might not be able to like absorb all of it and maintain friendships with people who are like in some cases a couple decades younger than I am and just have had completely different experiences and mindsets and like at least I could take it in. But it was it was humbling. It was like one of those I definitely like lost myself for a while. Kind of didn't know um yeah, you just really, when you look through and you see past events through this lens of like not being aware of what other people were experiencing, and then you look back and it's like, I thought everybody was happy and like having a good time. I really believe that. And then you know that what was going on inside of people or what their experience really was. And I look back on the same experiences and I'm like, oh, my idea of that is actually was just a falsehood or a story. It's very distorting and weird.
And I've heard this from multiple people, particularly people that never thought of themselves as anything but truly liberal, very much understanding the journey of others that didn't have privilege that they came from or white families. And it is hard, no matter how hard we try, and certainly try more now than ever, is how to look at something through someone else's scope.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, it's just completely different. And, randomly, I just got off the call with this young man who started a coding academy essentially inside NYCHA where he grew up. And he ended up in jail and he was like, got his shit together and you have to self-teach yourself everything there. They're not helping you at all, right? And then when he gets out to do something like this, and here we live in such a technology-driven world or opportunity-driven world, and most of the kids that he's teaching, yeah, they have a phone, but they like have no concept of what technology is, and neither do their parents. And so it is very hard, I think, for everyone to see life in a different angle.
Yep. And it's critical and key. And I also am so happy that I have a 17-year-old son and an 11-year-old who also, we talked a lot about what had happened. They knew like how important my job was to me, and we were able to like really talk about it, really talk about how things played out on social media, interpersonally, because they're experiencing a lot of these issues are popping up like everywhere. And helping them kind of navigate and see, when do you speak up? When do you take a step back, taking sides, knowing the facts, chiming in, like it's complicated.
It's very complicated. I mean, certainly when our kids were young, and one of the things we always said to them is whatever goes online stays online
Right.
for life.
Yep.
And so I think that is it's another really difficult thing. But eventually you pulled your bootstraps up and you got your shit together and you have a great website and you're writing a cookbook and you're still drawn to the world of food. And what has changed about how you wrote this cookbook versus past cookbook?
Yeah. So it's funny, when I wrote Where Cooking Begins, I still had a full-time job and I wrote that book kind of nights and weekends, really. And it's a long process. So there was like 8 or 10 months there where I was really morning, noon, and night, And the goal with That Sounds So Good, which is the second book, was to transition into this editor at large role, start splitting, working at home part of the time and develop the book at home and have, just the leisure of being able to spend daytime, full days, like just on the book. And then 6 weeks later, COVID happened, and my children and my husband were all at home with me. And I had an entire book that I had to develop that I thought I was going to, have free run of the place. And my whole day is to put on a podcast and cook my way through this. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm the lunch lady, breakfast, we run a school, it's a WeWork, like what happened? And it was a complete
shit show.
Shit show. I was going to say mind fuck. I was like, we didn't talk about cursing before we started. It was a total mind fuck. But I think in the end, it made the book a better book because I really was cooking at home every single day for my family. And so the recipes I had, they were planned out. I had recipe titles and chapters. I just had to make the food. And so through the whole development process, I was really aware of how many bowls, how long does this take, how many pieces of equipment, did the family like it? Does it work? Is it annoying? And then things like
your test kitchen.
Yeah, what groceries were available, because a core part of my recipe development is this section called Spin It, where I always give for every ingredient multiple other things you could use. And I was so happy that was built into my process from the beginning, because the early part of COVID, like, you couldn't get a chicken, frankly.
Yeah.
It was so random. Like, it wasn't just toilet paper. Like, sometimes it was just like weird things that you could, like flour or certain canned things. So it just taught me flexibility and just reality. And then pulling off photo shoots and with COVID restrictions,
not easy.
It was a challenge. We shot the whole thing in my home.
I love that. So we talk, and I'm sure you keep in touch with tons of different people from the industry and from the creative industry, which your husband is in as well, is, what's happening in this well, we're actually not in a post-COVID world. We're in the middle of a freaking global pandemic that is not, everyone has got a different experience based on where they're living. What's going on with the creatives and their interest to go back to work or not go back to work, or what's happening as a whole in terms of that industry, which has always been freelance driven, but not 100%.
No, I think for a lot of freelance, like creatives, the goal was maybe to be somewhere where you could be full-time creative, right? And I think that's the thing that has changed.
Right,
I
get
think
your health care paid for.
Right. And I think now people realize, first of all, that nothing is permanent. Jobs do not provide security, actually. And you can do very, very well on your own in an expansive way, freelancing. So on the one hand, it's making it, you mentioned my husband who runs an ad agency and marketing firm. They can't hire, hiring full-time people is really, really difficult because they're competing with like Google and Facebook and Apple, who are letting you, vest your shares on day one and all this stuff. They can't compete. Or people just are like, I'm good. I'm really happy working from home. And now it's normalized. So it's not even weird.
But what people want in terms of getting paid for seems to be out of whack with reality.
You mean that people are expecting to do better than they actually can?
As a freelancer.
Yeah.
And my guess is eventually the market will work itself out, because, if they want whatever it is an hour, they're not going to get it. And then they're going to, kick into gear what they can get for an hour.
That's right. Yeah. For me, it's funny. Someone asked me recently, do you ever see yourself going back to work for a brand like that, like another entity? And I can't. I cannot see that.
Why would you?
Why would I? So maybe for the stability, because this year has been like a total roller coaster,
Mhm.
where I'm very happy that I have my book advance with still payments left on it. Like, that those are coming. And then the other stuff is like, something's going to hit and something else might not. And you just don't know. You don't know what schedule you're on. Um, and you do need to partner with bigger companies, but on a collaborative partnership level, right? Whether you're pitching a TV show or working on a podcast.
And what are your aspirations for the industry? Like, where do you think the industry is going to end up? And by the way, you could be talking about anything from media and online. You're writing online now, or it could be, Allison Ronan is writing online, or it could be to something where it is new cookbooks, or it could be something where what's going to happen in restaurants.
Right. Oh God. Yeah, that's a whole podcast just of its own. For me, I think that one of the best changes that's happened in the past year for me is being so much more open to other food creators. So people with, other backgrounds, other cuisines, way more BIPOC people. Um, it is not this European derived trendy food alone world. I think that we are seeing and hearing and celebrating people who are experts in other cuisines. And I'm cooking from more people's cookbooks than I ever have in the past 5 years. I was so loyal to the Bon Appetit brand, and I thought so highly of the people who worked in the kitchen there, that like those were the recipes I cooked, and I kind of had blinders on to like all of this other work that amazing people are doing. And that happens when one person is like hogs all the attention, right? So that's one thing that I think is really, really cool, to see more diversity and to have people like me kind of step back so that other people can have the floor. It's better. It's better for the food world and for everybody in it. And I think it's also better for the consumer, because like it's a lot of the same thing when you let one person kind of dominate the conversation. So that's definitely one thing.
So you think that there will be more cultures that will drive the food industry, or will have more diversity in the I mean, there's Chinese food in every town in America, but it will probably be another level of something else. I mean, sushi's in every town now too, so
It's
it's
just
so
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's like a change where home cooks are not just going to be served recipes that someone decided these recipes do well. Whenever we do a lasagna, it performs well, so we'll just keep doing lasagna. Like, you don't find out what else will hit with people if you don't like stop thinking that way. And also the idea of who the home cook is was an idea that was, sort of seen through the prism of an elite luxury publication. You're looking at your readership through the lens of Condé Nast. You see one kind of person,
Right.
and it's the person who's not actually in their kitchen. It's the person that the business side believes that they can also sell watches, cars, and cosmetics to,
Right.
because it's advertising.
Right.
That is the product that you make. It's not supported by subscribers. That whole thing is supported by
Advertising.
advertisers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that bleeds down into absolutely everything, which needs to
Exactly.
change. Is there any magazines right now that you think are doing a really good job of being a lot more creative and embracive of different cultures on a month-to-month basis, or even online?
Yeah, I think Whetstone is a magazine that people talk about a lot, of being reflective and supported of Black cooks and Black creators. And I think that that's like a magazine that should gobble up all of the subscribers who realize like, wow, I am getting like a tiny fraction of this picture. And I don't know, I'm not really looking at magazines. They're all, maybe I'm just still slightly traumatized, but
Right.
it's not doing it for me. I'm watching a lot of different creators on YouTube and seeing other ways that people go about using that visual form to teach and to talk about food.
Interesting. Did you by any chance read this book, Black, White, and Gray?
No.
So it's basically a story of, this Black cook that came out of New York that had worked for Prune and was given an opportunity to start a restaurant down in the South by this Jewish dude who was always super liberal, and how they go about making this restaurant and how they look at the community they're in the South. And it goes on a little bit, but there is this again, how he always thought of himself so honest and understanding. And so through the book, you see through his eyes and her eyes. I mean, even
Right.
just going to a party and she's like, what the fuck? And he's
Right.
just like, isn't this great?
She's like, why did you bring me here?
Right. Like, who are these people? And so
Yep.
it is something that with also the next generation of kids. I mean, you've got kids that are coming up the pike and that will eventually, roll out into college or wherever they go with their lives, and how they're looking at the landscape differently, or how their schools are trying to look at the landscape differently.
Yep. Yep.
So it is, we're just in the weirdest times.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it has meant, sort of going back to the cookbook development time, really thinking about assumptions that I had made about when certain ingredients could come into my food. Like, I have a habit of seeing ingredients as flavors and maybe divorcing them from their, you know, origin cuisine, because they taste good and like I love eating them. And that was really good to stop and think about, like, contextualization. I mean, I hope that this is a permanent change, but you want to talk about food, you need to talk about context and you need to talk about where things came from. And not everything is derived from this European, classically whatever POV, right?
Yeah.
So I learned a lot in the process of kind of taking a step back and being like, oh, cool. I used, um, Malaysian shrimp paste in my steamed mussel dish, and it tastes amazing. And I served that with buttered baguette. Like, let's look now. We'll look at this differently, right? And it doesn't mean I can't make that or include it in my book, but the head note and talking about the ingredient, why I used it, where it came from, how it's normally used, typically, whatever, is important.
Right. I mean, my kids all went to, Little Red Elizabeth, and I don't remember what year they all went through this thing where you bring in foods of your culture and family, right? And so, something like, break the fast. I make the same kugel every year, right? Thanksgiving, don't change the stuffing,
Yep.
and so, and it's a pretty diverse school. So even what kids were reading in their homes wasn't necessarily what the other kids in their classes were reading.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that becomes much more of an open conversation, that can start around the table.
Totally. I mean, I think our kids are going to grow up and they're going to be like, you celebrate Thanksgiving? Like, the fact that you guys celebrated Thanksgiving is so messed up. Like,
Oh,
Thanksgiving is not, it's like
it's the
over.
worst. Well, my daughter, stood up, and her speech is, we should all acknowledge what a horrific, holiday this is and what we did to the Indians when we got here. And like, we started systemic racism back there. We're
Yeah.
like, okay, that's a good start to our Thanksgiving. But that's what she likes to do
Yep.
at any of these events. And the truth is she's spot on,
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
So on a totally different note, although the same note, what are your favorite cookbooks?
Oh, that's amazing. I was actually looking at old cookbooks 2 days ago. I was researching something. Um, one of my favorite books is A Mediterranean Cooking by Claudia Roden. And it's like a book that just felt like an encyclopedia of like foods that I had never experienced from so many different, it's like there's Turkish stuff in that book and Tunisian and, Israeli foods. And I love that cookbook. It holds up. You can go back to it. It has, gazpacho, but it also has, just like almond milk. It's amazing. A great book.
Wow. Okay.
Sunday Suppers at Luke was like by Suzanne Goin from LA, was a book that as a line cook, I poured over that book. And it's a very restauranty book. Like sometimes you read the recipes and it's like, I'm not putting half a cup of olive oil in this sauteed ale, right? It's like some things get like lost in translation when you do like from a big batch down to a home use, but just the flavors and how seasonal it is and how simply she cooked. Like that was a very, very inspiring book to me. Right now, I'm cooking a lot out of Hetty McKinnon's book, To Asia with Love, which is, you will pick it up and you will start looking at it. And it is a fantastic Chinese cookbook. And it took me several viewings to realize that it's also vegetarian. And I thought it was so cool that like the fact that it's a vegetarian cookbook wasn't part of the book title. It's like you sort of flipping through it and it's like, oh, there's no meat in this book. That's how she eats, that's how she cooks. It's very inspiring. I like get the idea reading this that I could actually maybe pull off like making a dumpling dough, which is, a mark of a good cookbook if it makes you feel like you
I
can
could do
do
this.
it. Yeah.
Right.
So that book is really terrific. And yeah, those are kind of current ones right now. There's books I like to look at, but I don't actually cook from them.
How many cookbooks do you own?
Uh, Several dozen. I have tried like ever since I had many, many more when I went to an office every day and had like a lot of space there to store all of those things. And when I came home, and realized, look, I have to live with this stuff in the house. Like we're gonna do, and I've done multiple rounds of like KonMari on the bookshelves. I actually did a big purge, and I did it as a fundraiser for the ACLU in partnership with this bookstore called Archistratus, which is in Greenpoint. Amazing, very special little independent bookstore. But it made it easier to say goodbye to stuff because I had some books that I was like, I've read this book, I loved this book. I'm probably not going to read it again. It's here for sentiment. It was very emotional.
It has to be. I mean, I have limited amount of space for my cookbooks. I actually do have the Mediterranean cooking book, and I went through and did a whole purge recently when we moved. And some of them like I've never really enjoyed it. I've never used it. Others were
Right.
like, oh, I remember this cookbook. Like Some Meals was one of my all-time faves. I think I made almost everything inside of it, but a lot of those recipes are heavy
Right.
and a different era.
Right.
But I don't want to part with it.
Totally. No, there's some that are same with me. Like, when French Women Cook, like, is this fantastic old book, and I don't cook from it, but it's like it's unique, and they don't make cookbooks like that anymore, and I keep it. Yeah. Um, yeah, it was An Everlasting Meal by Tamar Adler. That's also wonderful. It's more of a written through book, but there's these like really great little recipes sort of sprinkled throughout. And one of the things I admire about cookbooks that don't have any photography in them, like you can't do a cookbook like that really now. It's very, very, very hard.
Very hard.
And so those kinds of books with like no photos, I'm like, bold. That's a bold,
That's a bold move.
bold move.
Bold move. And do you think that people are returning to more cooking, more around the table, more being in the home?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. I do too.
Yeah. When I sort of count the like things that I'm grateful for about the pandemic, that's really definitely one of them.
Yeah.
So many people, I mean, for the book publishers, they were like, it was a holiday month every single month, you know?
Right.
Sold a lot of cookbooks.
Yeah. So when does your next cookbook come out?
October 4th.
My birthday.
I planned that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll send you a copy.
Please do. Well, anyway, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I mean, it really is interesting to hear you talk about what went on and how I think that a lot of people that have been essentially moved on, canceled, social media has been so nasty to them that it's just so difficult for the people that are standing, such as yourself, that we evolve, right? So you learn something from it and you moved on, and it's painful to happen. I know a few friends. It's just been absolutely awful, and I don't think that they ever thought they did anything,
That
and they couldn't
is
believe it happened.
That is such a key thing. There was so much fear. I had so much fear at the beginning because I didn't know what I had done, but I knew that I had offended deeply. And I was
Yes.
talking to a girlfriend who's also a white woman, and she said, yeah, that's the whole problem. We didn't know we were doing it when we did it. And that was a very powerful, like, right.
Right. Right. And makes you think about God, if the tables were flipped, right? And what that's like to be acknowledged but not being acknowledged. So it's a tough one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good luck with the cookbook.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Such
Take
a
care.
pleasure. Bye.